All right, Bismillah. Our beginning here tonight, and the goal of the first segment, there are 5 labels for each of the chapters of what we're doing: the rise, the robbery, the redemption, the resurrection, and the Renaissance. So each of them I'm using as boundaries for the content. So essentially, the rise begins with al-Islam in Africa. Okay, that's our starting line. And there's a couple of provisos, let's call it, that, and you obviously you can follow me. Didn't move. Okay, it's just that. Okay, text marks and tell that. So there's some slide changes, inshallah, that's going to come for you in-house. Let me go ahead and for those who are online. Caveat, disclaimer, proviso, I'm saying all of those fit. Numerous aspects, perspectives, conflicts, and diverse opinions exist regarding the concepts of what is Africa and who are the Africans, as well as inquiries around al-Islam in Africa, such as its origins, spread, and its significance for the continent. Rather than aiming to resolve these intricate debates and disagreements, our objective is to present our unique perspectives that shed light on the historical introduction of al-Islam in the global landscape, particularly focusing on its journey from Africa to America and its evolved significance for the world. So you just put on present. Next, the next slide after that one, which is this one. This is what I've chosen to be the analogy for what I'm saying and what I'm not saying, all right? So you have this map of the United States, and these blue lines are the rivers. These are all the major rivers in the United States. And I think you could probably count them on 2 hands. St. Lawrence, the Hudson, the Ohio, Tennessee, let's go out to the west, Colorado, Sacramento, you got Columbia, Missouri, and of course, don't forget the great Mississippi. And then of course, Rio Grande. So something as much as, or not much more than 2 hands account for all the rivers in at least the lower 48. It's interesting that there are no rivers in Alaska, mashallah, and no rivers in Hawaii. So in any case, our presentation is much more like the rivers as opposed to the tributaries. So there are other bodies of water that connect with these main tributary or these main arteries that we'll be speaking to, and they all have their place in the whole conversation. However, that's not what we're trying to do. We're given the broad, big, what do they call it, 50,000 foot view, 30,000 foot view. Those, we're using those because of the intricacy and the complexity of the thing that we're actually talking about. So we can't address everything, even inside of my competence or lack of it. So statements are ups and downs, positives and negatives are normal phenomena. If you add up graphs of all the market performances red days to see the aggregate losses in a given period of time, and then add up all the green days to see the aggregate gains in any given period of time, you'll see the net effect. For example, the moonshot was off target. That was off the trajectory, the perfect mathematical trajectory line to the moon. It was off target for 90% of the time, yet it still reached its target. If you take 100-year performance, the 100-year performance of the US stock market, for example, without focusing on the crash of 29, the stock market was up 5x, that means 500%, as of 1965. But then 17 years, from 65 to 82, the stock market lost 72% of its value, but it has since recouped all those losses, and the overall market historically is up right now 28x, that's 2,800% from its inception. So consequently, we're saying this. While we know that there have been many highs and lows on the continent over the centuries, our focus will be the broad view of al-Islam's history in Africa, its rise and its decline. Okay, Masha, when you say you want to get to that little, so it'll be bigger. The little, it looks like a screen, like a pull-up movie screen. Yeah, see what happens. That's good. So you can, yeah, great. Don't touch it. No, that's true.
It goes in and out, so.
Yeah, that's crazy. MashaAllah.
MashaAllah.
All right, we're going. So to continue. Having said that, there's a recurring theme in our history which speaks to the Sunnah of Allah. You know, the Sunnah of Allah is the will of Allah, and the Sunnah of Allah is also the laws of nature when you grasp them correctly. There's a recurring theme in our history which speaks to the Sunnah of Allah and the culpability of the historic Arab and African Muslim world and their contribution to the subordinate posture that the Muslim world, particularly Arab and African, finds itself in the modern world today. God says in the Quran, ذَلِّكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَكُنْ مُغَيِّرًا نِعْمَةً أَنْعَمَهَا عَلَى قَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. This from the 53rd ayah of the 8th surah. An expression of it is, because Allah will never change the grace which He bestowed upon a people until they change what is in their own souls. And verily Allah is He who hears and knows all things. So I kept that little model of the stock chart, whatever that we just looked at, because this is the case. If there's an up and there's a down, then up comes because you are doing what Allah has ordered for you to do. Down comes when you fail to do what Allah has ordered for you to do. So in that we have our ups and downs, and thus this has happened on the continent as well. And so as we say, while you can look at the red days, you can look at the green days, in the aggregate, you look at what exists at a given moment in time, that is the cumulative effect of what had preceded it. So I'm saying we go back, I want you to understand what's inside my thinking. When we go back, you look at the Muslim condition in the modern world today. Is that the condition that Allah created the Muslims of that place to be in? If Africa is not today in the place that Allah intends for it to be, and if the Middle East, quote unquote, as it's called, is not where it's supposed to be as Muslims, question becomes, how do we get into this state? Where is that condition? And this is why we read the verse. Allah doesn't change the condition of anybody. It doesn't go up from down or down from up until you change what is in your own soul. So when you look at the aggregate state and condition, does it look like a blessed or an unblessed condition? I'm gonna leave you to answer that question. So Allah says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, Sunnatullahi fil ladhina khalaw min qablu. وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. He says, this is the established way of Allah with those who have passed on before, and you will not find in the way of Allah any change. And the verse ends in the same way. When my mind starts running like this, my Arabic reading competence is not such that I can be as energetic in my mind and spirit right now and be a good Arabic reader. I'm working on it though. I'm working on it. Shout out to Islamic Learning Institute that has the juz read every day, and I'm on there practicing with them. In any case, so the same statement is made at the end of this verse, and we'll read just that latter portion. It says, Sunnatul awwaleen. It's the sunnah from way back. فَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا وَلَن تَجِدُوا لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. So it says, but you will never find in the way of Allah any change, and you will never find in the way of Allah any alteration. So Allah, as we already know, is Allah says, and it's true, He's never unjust to any of His creatures. So conditions that we find ourselves in as Allah's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Hadith Qudsi, it also says, it is but your deeds that I reckon up and recompense you for. So let him who finds good praise Allah, and let him who finds other than that blame no one but himself. And I am hitting on the sentiment that sometimes people try to excuse Muslims historically and now, apologists for this, that, or other, or the statements, whatever. I'm not saying these folks ain't doing something, Mossad, CIA, FBI, Homeland, whoever. Yeah, but God is God. So it's like, is Mossad bigger than God? They'll make a bumper sticker out of that, but no, they're not. So I'm gonna push on. So that's why I don't know how much time these things are gonna take. I don't know when I'm gonna take off. So let's see. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is my point at this juncture, the recurring theme of practice and impracticality, falling into technological disparity. It's very important. Technology gap. You know, the simple definition of technology gap is the technology that's available and how much of it you're using. So the distance between that which is available and how much you're using, and we can see some of my own lapse of competence in some of these platforms here. So in those regards, I'm in a technology gap. I'm in a technology gap. So it's like when we have Amatullah, and shout out, as we say, so Amatullah, my daughter-in-law, alhamdulillah, with the technical input, or we wouldn't be seeing this right now. Because I'm in the technology gap. I'm like Joseph in the well trying to get pulled out. So alhamdulillah, thank Allah for good in-laws. Moving on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا كَانَ لِنَفْسٍ أَن تُؤْمِنَ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَيَجْعَلَ رِجْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. This is Quran. Allah says, it is not for any soul to believe except by the permission of Allah, and He will put defilement, that is, other translators say, He will cause uncleanness to come upon those who don't use their intellect. And I'm saying to you, I'm about to read a quotation that I often read that speaks to that. This is Dr. Abdul Hamid Abu Suleiman. This is actually from his dissertation that he got his doctorate. We met him when we were in Malaysia in 97. And it's a book that I recommend for everyone to read from, this is from, the title of the book is Toward an Islamic Theory of International Relations. So he covers the whole history. It's very, very wonderfully. So to be able to see, okay, well, what happened between the Ali and the Abu Bakr? Why do the Shia do this? And why do the Sunnis do that? And when did that come up? And what about Aisha? Why was she going up against Ali and da-da-da-da? It's like, he puts that history in perspective. And I'm saying in some, from what he gives, is Muslims have been in, to the extent that I'll use this term, an imperfect condition. You got to work with me on that. From the time of the assassination of Uthman, you know that Omar, I'm not trying to teach that history, but Omar was also killed. And the only question that he asked when he was stabbed, he said, who did that? He said, oh, it was a pagan. It was a pagan, somebody who was not a Muslim. He was good with just that. And he died X number of days, after that. But then his successor, Uthman, assassinated by Muslims. Ali, we know also, his end was at the hand of Muslims, if I'm correct. I don't think I'm not correct. From that point on, Muslims have not had that. We've had our red days and our green days, our red centuries and our green centuries. You understand? Mm-hmm. But the culmination, come on, see if it's simple enough. Extension cord. Look on the stage. Go through that door right there. It should be on the top of those chairs, inshallah. All right, well, let's give me an excuse to get back online because I'm about to go off on a tangent. Yeah, go through the other door. Where are we at? All right, so let's just read what he has to say. If you have a question about anything that I said that right there, of course, free to do that. So, and this gets to what resulted from what I'm talking about in that history that was basically initiated with the assassination of Uthman. That part of our Islamic history. And it was a split that came about between the theological and the political sectors of the Islamic world, the Islamic leadership, the Khulafa Rashidun, the Khalifa, the Caliphate, however you want to label it. That's when it's. That's when Shura really went out of the Muslim Ummah. The military folks was on the military side, the theological folks was on the theological side, and that has been the split. So even when we went to the Sudan, it was very clear at that time that the life of Sudan itself was in the hands of the religious. Behind you over there somewhere, one side was by the military and the other side was by the theological, right? And it's that split is there right now in most Muslim countries that you go to. Just do what you can. Y'all gotta tell me how it looks. I don't know how it looks. Yeah, you work it out. Going on. So the separation of the theological and the political sectors after the Prophet's time, now quoting him, pitted the religious sector of the society, the secular, a concept fundamentally alien to Islam. This situation developed because the ulama, the Muslim theologians and learned men were for centuries deeply involved in taqlid, and taqlid means blind following. This is Dr. Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman. He's also the author of A Crisis in the Muslim Mind that I always recommend. Were deeply involved in taqlid and arid legalism, thereby providing little leadership. So the theological side wasn't leading the Muslim body, the political side wasn't leading the Muslim body in toto, and they weren't talking to each other, okay? And this period of time that he's talking about, particularly in advance of his whole thesis, at this point of his conversation, like, what happened to the Muslims in the Renaissance? This is what he's talking about. He said, what happened to the Muslims in the Renaissance? Now he goes on. Their education lacked the concept of systematic empirical observation and left them alienated from those specializing in the newly evolved social sciences with their emphasis on application and methods, right? There was a new epistemology. There was a new way of learning and knowing. There was new technology, effectively, that Muslims weren't keeping up with. And this was in the time of the Renaissance that he's speaking to. How were we so harshly affected? It was because we weren't keeping up. All right. If anybody got a speaker on you, make sure you take it off. They were unaware. Now here's the lapse. The lapse came from this incapacity that he's describing. He says they were unaware of the repercussions of the new knowledge and the methods on the composition. I mean, not only did you not know the technology, you did not know how the technology was going to affect the interaction and the organization of your society. Just like we right now with AI, do we really know what's going to happen or what is happening with AI and all the rest of it? So Muslims can fall again into another technology gap right now, to the extent that we don't keep up with and understand the repercussions of the technology that is moving even faster now than it was moving during the time just post-Renaissance. It says they were unaware of the repercussions of the new knowledge and the methods on the composition, interaction, and organization of society. Just think about that. That's 4 things. It said the technology is going to affect the composition of your society, the interaction of your society. That's 3 things. I need to go back to arithmetic. Composition of society, the interaction and the organization of society. We need to know that because we are being affected in those ways, even if we don't know, right? It says, nor were they able to envision the potential of this new knowledge. Here's a big key. The new knowledge harnessed, like you harness a horse, harnessed, but you harness it to your values, your goals, and your overall paradigm. And that's what they were unable to do. And I'm saying, as we at the top of this piece, it's a recurring theme. Our practice and our impracticality and the condition that we fall into because of the technological disparity, right? That's critical. I need whatever help I need to get from that. So now here's a larger picture on that, or how can you say, expanding on that idea. So the post-Renaissance, this is to pinpoint the problem in post-Renaissance and modern Muslim cultural thinking. That's a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. But one author has addressed it in part, Muhammad Arkoun, in his book, Rethinking Islam, 1994. He said, Islamic culture has always suffered from the problem of the unthought and the unthinkable. And I know this broad statement to say this Islamic culture. You have to get also into the whole idea of the differentiation of Islamic culture, which you have one quote from a scholar that's critical in that. But the point is to understand that it is a habit in Islamic cultures in the modern era, that period of time, I'm just calling it post-Renaissance, what have you, we fall into, if you know anything, you know about the developments of the schools of thought, it's like the groundedness, Muslims have lacked a groundedness for a very long time. But again, I'm going back. There are red days and there are green days, red centuries and green centuries. In the aggregate, I'm saying, sitting as we are in the 21st century, is there a condition that says, yes, that's what Muslims are about. That's what Muslims were created for. Where in the world can you go right now and find that to be the case? Now, this is what God was talking about. Please introduce me to it. If seriously, I'm very, very serious. And mashallah, I might give me a ticket. Because I would have to see that for myself. Because, well, inshallah, no. No. So you got to watch. We're not just move on. So Islamic culture has always suffered from the problem of the unthought and the unthinkable. there are certain issues in Islamic culture that remain unthought, while other issues remain unthinkable. In other words, there are certain mental sets which prevent Muslims from entertaining certain thoughts. It's like, oh no, I don't even want to think about that. But wait a minute, your life depends on it, right? And there are those, and again, that's when you're talking about, you're speaking to practice and impracticality. Some Muslims practice, and too many Muslims practice, is impractical. And as a consequence, the benefits that come from the very practical nature of al-Islam does not reach those Muslims because of the unthinkable and the unthought, right? Let's move on. This is a history reflection on that in this particular portion. This is from The Lever of Riches. This book, The Lever of Riches, it covers just the history of wealth and technology and tools and blah, blah. But let's read this. This is the best, this is the most condensed portion that I could pull. So, it says, until recently, the verdict of technological historians on medieval Islam, and that medieval Islam is that the post 12th century or so, if I'm correct. Medieval Islam was harsh, right? It contends that it is difficult to discover anything that could be called an enrichment of acquired knowledge. Yet, technological creativity as an economic phenomena does not require the creation of totally new knowledge. Innovation does not require invention. All right, a lot to be said about that. The point is, he's pushing back, this author is pushing back against the technological historians that are harsh on medieval Islam, because he's saying, look, you don't have to invent stuff in order to advance riches, and you don't have to invent stuff to be innovative. Innovative doesn't mean inventive per se, like the wheel or fire or whatever else. So now he goes on, he says, borrowing, extending, and adapting will increase the supply of goods and services as well, meaning it's good for business. Borrowing, extending, and adapting. I'm sorry, I can't remember the person's name that I have in mind, but he has a series of lectures that he does, whatever, on culture and the like. But he points out that the life of humanity and the advancement of humanity has been 5% innovation, and meaning from the inventive side of that, there's been 5% innovation and 95% imitation. And he starts his lecture out by asking the question, how many of you have ever thought a thought that changed the world? He said, how many of you have ever done anything that changed the world? You created something that changed the world, right? Let's go with somebody, the zipper, right? The first zipper. That changed the world, right? So the wheel, all the rest of it. But he also goes and said, what about Steve Jobs, right? Some, the iPhone, and the other innovations that they brought. What do others do? By and large, once it gets started, it's just a matter of imitation. Why reinvent the wheel when this is good? So let's take that. So the 95% benefit from the 5% in the context of, we'll get to the Nation of Islam lessons later. It benefits from the 5% all the time, right? The problem is that without original ideas, borrowing and adapting run into diminishing returns. You can't be 100% borrowing community. You have to have some innovators in your community, or your community is going to die for the lack of innovation. He goes on, at this level, the technological creativity of the Islamic civilization, for some reason, the author is saying, and I don't even remember, I think I would have it up here, I don't think he even gave an answer. But he asked the question. He's saying it's the technological creativity of the Islamic civilization. That's the same civilization that gave you the zero in mathematics and all the other thousands of inventions and the like. But let me go on. He said, for some reason, ran into difficulties. Islamic society was not capable, and I put an end note here, meaning that we've lost the capacity. Not that we weren't, well, yeah, we weren't capable once you lose the capacity when you can't get to capability, but the nature is still there. But I'm gonna keep reading his quote. He said, Islamic society was not capable of adding much new. He said, for some reason, this became the problem of adding much new to the existing stock of ideas it retrieved and applied so brilliantly, meaning that we were good in learning. There was a point where we were advancing in that learning, but we lost the capacity somewhere along the line to be innovative upon the things that we were finding and that we were discovering. So then he said, what happened in consequence of that? Consequently, Islamic technology eventually ran out of steam. And here's a big underlined critical point. At some time around the 12th century, Islam lost its momentum and technological supremacy because we were the technological supreme, right? The technological eventually passed to the Christians, their Christian enemies north of the Pyrenees, who were equally capable. Okay, I can borrow technology from others as well. But here's the other shoe. He said, and they turned out, at this time, they turned out to be better at creating their own. That means that they were innovators as well. They were imitators and they were innovators. It's a big thing. And that had happened around the 12th century. So he goes on, he says, the West initially far behind, caveman, that old idea, whatever, and all the dark ages, they in the dark ages, we brought them the Renaissance by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also through the conflict of the Crusades and the like. Then they got their hands on what we had also discovered, and also our movement took what Allah blessed us to encounter and clean up, etc., and it brought them to life, but we went to sleep at the same time. So that's why he says around the 12th century, right? Something happened. I'm gonna tell you what it is just a second. So the West, initially far behind, was equally willing to learn from other cultures, but never lost its capacity. Should underline that too. Never lost its capacity to improve upon and refine other ideas, applying them to new combinations, adapting them to novel usages. I'm sorry, I got to go back to this other statement here. What was the one? No, yeah, I guess you got to too. Mm-hmm. So it's the idea of certain mental sets which prevent Muslims from entertaining certain thoughts, certain things that are seen to be unthought and unthinkable. That means that we may have faced problems at some point in time, and somebody said, well, why don't we do this? Oh, no, we never do that. We can't never do that. No, you might have just passed up the solution. Why? Because you found it unthinkable, because you couldn't see beyond the blinders that the mindset that you had given you. Moving past that. So it says in new combination, applying them in new combination, adapting them to novel usages, and eventually surpassing. This is what the European did in the West. Watch this. Eventually surpassing the original ideas to the point where the original inventing society had to borrow its own ideas back, often unrecognizably altered and improved. Having pioneered, he's giving this example, having pioneered power and chemical technologies. That's what we were already on that. We were the leaders of technology. Having done so, but by the 13th century, Islamic society began to even show signs of backwardness. Not only were we not leading anymore, by the 13th century, you're going backwards. And you know what? One word did it. Bid'ah. Bid'ah bit us in the butt, and that's the end of it. What is bid'ah? Bid'ah is innovation. But taking it literally and not with the clear detail, bid'ah in the way that the prophet was using it to say that every innovation leads to hell, that's not what the prophet was talking about. Don't do anything different. Don't change technology. Don't advance what you find from somewhere else. Innovate, but don't change the religion. Don't say that it's 6 Fard prayers. Don't say that Ramadan is in December. I'm just trying to bring you home a little bit. Don't say Ramadan is in December. Don't say God came in the person of so-and-so and they are the God and there is, quote unquote, no God unseen. Don't say that. That's bid'ah. Don't say you got to turn to the east whenever and wherever you are and say that's when you're making the right prayer. No, that's bid'ah. That's what you're supposed to, that leads to hell. But if you misapply that translation of innovation to say, don't change nothing, don't do anything new, you lose the, I refer someone to you. Those of you who really want to know about language and how language shapes thoughts and minds, etc. Lera Boroditsky, Lera, L-E-R-A, Boroditsky. Point is, your language sets the frame for how you use your own power of thought. And if someone gives you a false frame that you think through, you may as well be in a prison because that's exactly what you're in. You're bound by that language. So if someone gives us, in the name of Allah and the Prophet, a language that says, do not innovate, and they're purists, quote unquote, in that sense, fanatical, I'm gonna have to say. Well, that's what killed our advancement. That's what brought us into the dark ages. The bid'ah, brother, bid'ah. Okay, moving on. So, all right, so that's the problem of the post-Renaissance and modern Muslim cultural thinking. So, history testifies to the law of Allah operating in the field of human existence. The patterns of human history reveal the operations of the law of Allah, the law of nature, and the will of Allah, which interpenetrates all creation. In the history of the modern world, this is what's not appreciated. There is no greater sign of all of these than in the history of Bilalian Muslims. You and I who are Bilalian Muslims, don't worry about the supremacy, appearance, or ethnocentrism. When you understand it, none of that is involved at all. And that's what we're trying to get to the point where we can try to clarify that. Some people get lost in that process. In fact, when Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, when we were using Bilalian, we mashallah, we were in Saudi Arabia and somebody published a newspaper article, and so they had the leader of Al-Bilaliyun, so they had that in. And Imam Muhammad pointed out that that those who had a fear of us using that name, because again, a part of the whole Muslim history is that, somebody come up with a name, they're coming up with a cult. It's like a name cult, right? So he said, and so the Imam just basically said, it's like they're afraid. So that's why you get the suppression of the use even of that name. Because again, the fears that come out of a history but you know, whatever, you got the Ahmadiyya, in which the Nation of Islam, we were connected with the Ahmadiyya by virtue of the nature of what Farad and where he came from. And so, okay, we get your fears. We understand that. But brother and sister, I'm going to say right now, and I hope and pray Allah we're able to, in this time that we'll spend together over these coming weekends, the subtlety and the subtlety and the accuracy of the particular problem that the mind that I'm using right now, and the thinking that I'm using right now, and it's born from that whole process, mashallah, that whole process. And when, mashallah, you know, when you have that mind, you know, sometimes I try to protect you from going the wrong way with things I say, but I can't do it sometimes. But when you have that mind, it's like, no, it's not that. Some people, it's like fasting, right? You Muslims fasting. But when you talk to somebody that has no idea about fasting, they say, man, y'all crazy. Y'all, you know, you can't even drink no water. So they don't understand. What would make somebody want to do something like that? It's like you have to be a Muslim and you have to believe in Allah and everything that it promises. And it is so easy. You feel like, is there something else I should be doing? It's like I thought this was supposed to be hard, right? But that was way back when. What I'm saying is there's a mindset that these ideas and even these personalities that you're seeing there on the screen and what they mean and what they are is just I don't know. It's like you just have to get it. So that's why we talked about taking all this time to do that. But moving on, this is the idea. So this is kind of an encapsulation in a minor way of that stream. You know, history on one level and types of things that we go through. I put this piece on here. Let me go ahead and say, I put this piece on here because here's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sitting down talking to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Come on now.
Right.
You're going to think neither one of them was affected by the other one while they talked to each other?
Right.
El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So this came about by quote unquote happenstance, I believe, in an airport. And they saw it. Do they look like they're upset with each other? You know, they both understand some sense of their own power. So that's why, you know, you got to see the history, and there's a particular mind that you need to come into, and the mind is born of the language. Right? Kind of hold on to that. I mean, I would say make a note for yourself on that if you don't really already just grasp that, because we use terms. I say we, those who say Imam Muhammad is our leader, that the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad. But when we say the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad, we're also saying the mind of W.D. Muhammad, not his mind in particular, but the kind of sensitivity and perception that comes from using the language that he taught, because that new language is a new mind. I mean, it is. And so if you've never touched that mind, been exposed to that mind, you know, sought to absorb that mind, then it sounds like something else. But when you absorb it, that's where you are. Let me try one thing I'm trying to get out of. Sometimes I do feel like I get in a rabbit hole and okay, how do you get out of here now? You done got all the way down there. How you gonna get out? Try to climb my way out of here, but in terms of that language, it just with language, logic, sensitivities, right? Every language has a logic. This Lera Boroditsky, that's her, she gives example. They do a test. They do a test on different cultures, different tribes, different people with different languages. What comes along with different languages is different metaphors, different analogies, different modes by which you can conceptualize. Listen to what I'm saying. In Imam Muhammad's language, concept means something that you can grasp. That's really concept. Even we have this language comprehend. Do you comprehend? Right? Comprehend meaning get around it, hold it, right? Every language has a different capacity for different things, has a greater capacity for different things, right? Latin, Greek, Spanish, Arabic, Hebrew. There's something, some use, when you take language as a tool, there's some use that some languages are better for than others. And a lot of it has to do with their geography, their history, and all of that. So the concepts of time and space are different. Don't worry. Concepts of time and space are different for every human group. And there's 7,000 languages on the planet Earth right now, by estimate. So that means that there's 7,000 different ways of perceiving time, space, what have you. So it's very interesting. A group, I can't think of their name. I think they're Aborigine Australians. When they talk to each other, it's a part of their culture that they're always oriented in space in a particular way. It's just in them, the north, east, west, and south of it. You look her up and you get a better explanation than myself. But she points out as an example is that when you meet someone in that native land, country, language, then just the how do you do part requires that you say, it's not difficult for them, it's difficult for us to imagine, but for them, it's like, say, how are you? The reply in their language would translate to something like, I'm coming from the west, heading for the far north. That's how their language would translate. And other things that said, move your keys to the northwest corner of the table. That's our translation of it. In their language, they would say it in the way that they say it in their language. But when we translate it, or the English speakers for sure, then it winds up having some kind of directional content, right? East, west, north, south, northwest, southeast, etc. All the language incorporates that. So the only thing I can pull from that is to say that to ask a 5-year-old child, she says, in their language, literally to ask them, you ask, for example, which way is southeast? Which way is southeast? And the child automatically knows, literally, it doesn't matter where you find the child, where the child is, which way is southeast. They're going right there. It's like they know. If you see him in the next town or whatever, yeah, which way is northwest? Because everybody is oriented by their language. So everybody always knows literally where they are. So the language orients the people in line with the rising and setting of the sun. I could explain more beyond that, but to get past this, what I'm saying is that you get a new language, you get a new orientation, you get a new language, you live in a different reality. And if the language that you use is not your language, you're living in somebody else's reality. So when we talk about the language of Imam Muhammad, We're talking about an orientation. We're talking about a realization, a real world impact of these perceptions that grow out of the language's capability of helping you to grasp concepts that for some are unthought and unthinkable. So when the Imam came in, for example, and explained to us that you emphasize sunnah, sunnah, sunnah when you speak about the Prophet, but Allah never says the sunnah of the Prophet in the Quran. This is his language. What Allah says of the Prophet, uswatun hasana. He says his uswa. When Allah speaks about sunnah, he's speaking about himself. He said the sunnah of Allah and the uswa of Muhammad. That's language. Because you're going to think in a different way when that word doesn't emotionally strike you the way that so many have been struck by, that's not sunnah, brother. That's not sunnah. What are you talking about? And the Imam explained, the sunnah comes from the uswa. Now, you have to understand how that arises. But I hope I'm not on a tangent right now, but we got a little ways to go. Okay, so the point is, inside of this whole language thing, so now we're gonna shift. Going forward. So most of what I'm saying now, I would what's coming right now. Dr. Ali Mazrui, wonderful PBS piece. You can find it on YouTube, it's good. And you can also find the book. You can also find it in PDF as well. I took important pieces, especially from this immediate material that I'm going to speak to from his book. And this book is done by one of our brothers, Amin Yasser Muhammad. This Muslims in African History, Correcting the Record and Exposing the Clandestine Disinformation Campaign Against Islam. That's a new, when he changed the book, he changed the title, he added that title, but originally he published it under Africa minus Al-Islam Cheats. And so that was from a quote from Imam Muhammad in one of his lectures, that the grand life of Africa is the life that Al-Islam impressed upon that. And so obviously we have to talk about that. I didn't put his table of contents in there, but I called him to find out if he's publishing it, he's still working on it. I told him, I said, look, I'm willing to give and help financially support you republishing it, because I'll tell you this, those people who are extreme, I'll put it this way, extreme or anti-Islam, I want to be specific, those who are anti-Islam in their Afrocentricity. Yeah. If in their Afrocentricity, yeah, y'all Muslims, y'all messed it up, the whole Chancellor Williams piece. And you get the book, you find out who he actually was working for. In any case, he just reading the table of contents, supporting his thesis with everyone that people use to try to undermine Al-Islam. He uses the quotation from the people that which they only share one voice, and it becomes an antagonistic Islam voice, when those people, they had other things to say about Islam, but the ones who don't want you to hear that part, they don't want to hear that. But that's what his whole book is. So I'll say now, and I say before, for those type, this is the only book you need. For those, you don't need a library. If you get your hands on this book, Muslims in African History, that's all you need. There's hardly a challenge or a charge they can bring to Al-Islam and the spread of Al-Islam in Africa that he doesn't address from authoritative sources that they respect. Okay, so let's go on with that. And this is a big issue. The whole issue of literally, concretely, the whole idea of, well, what is Africa? Okay. This is Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, wonderful. I hope many of you know about him. And they came before Columbus. So you can find his material on YouTube as well. One of our brothers from the Caribbean. It's really thorough. But I'm just pulling this right here. It says, according to historian Ivan Van Sertima, Africa comes from the term Afro-Ika, means birthplace and motherland. Essentially, Afro-Ika means to turn towards the opening of the ka, the womb or birthplace, right? So that Africa is the birthplace. It's like in all human family, the whole human family traces its life back to that continent that's known as Africa, right? Africa was a continent with a rich tapestry of interactions, including wars before European colonialism. We didn't wait till white folks show up and now let's fight. No, we were fighting each other before that. And this is a piece that I'm very, very happy to be able to share, because I'm sure many of us have not seen it and are not aware of it. But it's estimated that Africa had up to 10,000 different states. How many states the United States got? We got 50. The African continent had 10,000 different states and autonomous groups with distinct languages and customs at its peak prior to the Europeans. You know, Africa's called the dark continent. We don't know what's in there. It's like, wow, it's big, huge. You can put the whole lower 48 of the United States in the Sahara Desert. My wife at this point would say, did you hear what I said? I mean, just imagine that. The whole United States in one desert in Africa. MashaAllah. In what is called Africa, because that's the point. So the issue of, even the whole issue of return. Somebody tell me, I'm going back to Africa. Okay, which part? Which part? You know, what's going on? Which person? That's you right there. What do you need? Oh, my bad. My bad, Tari. My power is about to die, so I don't know. I don't know what we can do.
You don't have to plug. I'll get another extension.
What does she do with the cord? She's just working on
Yeah,
this.
no, it's okay. We can go with
You
that.
work it out?
Give me your box. You have your plug box.
My plug box.
Look, this is all you getting.
Oh.
There we go.
Inshallah, we'll see what happens. So someone's time to break through. Let's see what happens. So where we at? It says the customs at its peak prior to European influence, right? So this map on the right, Africa is such a colossal continent that we don't often realize that it can almost fit the entire contiguous United States into the Sahara Desert. The continent can also squeeze in China. Are you with that? You could take China and put it in Africa, and the United States in Africa. Western Europe, India, Argentina, Scandinavia, and the UK and still have room left over. How many of our people do you think know how big that is? And I don't know if I put that note here. Yeah, maybe, yeah, good. Let's keep going. In 50, where the map that we look at in the world and that classrooms were covered with was called the Mercator map, right? When was that map made? 16th century, 1569. Before there was any real penetration by Europe of Africa. It was still a dark continent to them. 1569. So, and he designed it primarily as a map to use, and is used to this day as a navigational tool for European sailors. And as we go on, you'll find that very closely tied to, intimately tied to the Atlantic slave trade was what's called the Age of Exploration. Europeans getting on their boats and going to discover countries. Like if we get there, we discovered it. Crazy. So Mercator. Now, what's been brought up is the Peters projection map. The Peters projection map gives a more accurate, how can you say, proportional relations of the continents and the like. So continents that have been made to be seen to be big, which are really small by comparison, and like Africa, those have been made to appear small, which are actually big. The Peters projection map is what gives some correction on that. Continuing, European maps misrepresent the relationship of Arabia to Africa. This led to a false division, distancing so-called Africa from the origins of al-Islam. It's very important. It's like, let's not have these Africans think that they have anything to do with Islam. Let's tell them that the Arabs, the Muslims, they came in and messed up your stuff. This led to a false division, distancing so-called Africa from the origins of al-Islam. Imam Muhammad highlighted this trick on the mind by pointing out that they labeled India as a part of Asia, but not Arabia as a part of Africa, despite Arabia being closer to Africa than India is to Asia. The political objective behind such European mapping was to sever the ties between Africans and their Islamic heritage in Arabia. That is the desire to say, that's not you. Islam is not you. That's somebody else. So that don't be connected with that. That's not African. Okay? Historically, there has always been significant interaction between Arab and African communities. They are so close that there are no hadith about Muslims fleeing from Mecca using boats to get to Abyssinia. Have you seen a hadith? We made two hijras to Abyssinia. I have not seen a hadith that said, yeah, and then we climbed aboard the boats and we floated for 2 hours and then we landed in Ethiopia. Come on now, it's like they must have walked or rode camels. It doesn't matter. The point is, nothing significant about it. What does it mean? It means that the land masses are connected. But it was that Suez Canal thing, when that really went down, that was it. And again, the agenda that the European imperialists had in mind, which is right here. This, of course, this is later. Surprise, surprise, let me just finish this. European powers defined Africa's boundaries using the Red Sea as a symbolic divide, despite historical and cultural ties with the Arabian Peninsula. the Suez Canal's construction in the 19th century reinforced this separation. So you can see it's an artificial separation that was created, and a how can you say, a social construct to say, okay, we're going to use the Red Sea. The Red Sea is the dividing point between Arabia and Africa. So Arabia is not Africa, and Africa is not Arabia. The Red Sea. Oh, okay. Well, now let's do this Suez Canal. Suez Canal, that locks it in. So for sure, we have now artificial instantiations that enable our social construct to be affirmed, and we keep everything else out of the history books and we'll be good, right? So the Suez Canal's construction in the 19th century reinforced this separation, prioritizing European interests over Arab connections. They're at work beginning to establish the social, political, cultural, historical infrastructure for what they plan to do, right? We're going to be going back. I know we skipped ahead, but this is in the preface. So we can be clear on, well, what is actually Africa, right? Then we're going to go back to that history, inshallah, in the next segment. European influence shaped perceptions of Africa, disconnecting Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula while linking Black peoples south of the Sahara with the Arabs north of it, ultimately defining Africa's identity. So the idea that operates in the world right now is that the real Africans are the Africans below the sub-Saharan Africans. They're the real Africans. Those others up there in the quote unquote North Africa, they're not the real Africans. They're Arabized, or they've been taken over by the Arabs and the like. This is a construction that has come into the mind in consequence of all the colonialism and imperialism and everything else. But that's not the natural way. But when they redesigned the map, they redesigned the political affiliation, relationship, and the identity of the individuals on that landmass. So in the mapping before, the illustration at the top there, on the mapping before, Arabia was all a part of it. All of that was Africa, even though it have the name Asia on it, and all of Africa was called Ethiopia at that time. But the point is, it's all considered to be one common body. But what we see now in the thing that we call Africa, and when we look for memorabilia, souvenirs, or what have you, that's the shape they have on the bottom, cutting out Arabia. But again, you should understand it has political design. All right, so alhamdulillah, we're going to go ahead and conclude there, and we'll pick up inshallah tomorrow. Pick up tomorrow right here where we are in terms of the rise and the decline. So that will basically take up most of our well, I'm pretty sure most of our time on Saturday, inshallah. So we can turn on the lights now, and thank you. And so Allahu Akbar. Did anybody have any question cards that you were passing, or did you get any? No? Okay. Well, anything that has a relationship to it, I mean, if I can answer it, I will. If I can't, I won't. So where we at? What are we saying? Oh, you way somewhere. Okay. Yeah, and for you to say that, then I'll accept that from you. So
She's got.
There is one question. The others here, but I haven't provided part.
let me give you the mic, read your microphone.
Hoping that you write it down.
Little complicated. That's okay. I'll just
What are we doing? We're here.
Mr. Sean created a question that he may want to hear the answer. He wouldn't speak to me individually.
As long as me, I don't know. Yeah. So if you could articulate.
Yeah, there's one question here.
Okay.
Just trying to ensure I'm clear. From Belinda, you might have to, just kind of elaborate. It says, will your teachings be posted for revisiting? So in other words, are you asking if the slideshow will be available?
As much as we get recorded, it's going to be on Facebook, YouTube. Those are the ones that you can actually count on more so. So we are broadcasting it. We are recording it on Zoom, but the Zoom would likely wind up on clearunderstanding.org and possibly messyortheme.org, but we have to work all those details out. That's.
Are there any more,
They get to it,
questions?
it records.
that do
it straight
with
there.
on the cards? Yes.
No, not too.
Because you would this time, if you like for them to just post them due to the time, or have them write the questions down still?
Ideally, we want people to keep writing questions, because what that becomes is fodder for future publications. Because you might ask a question, we may have content for it, or we may need to research some further content
Oh,
for it. Because largely what I am doing this for is, it's like, I'm just an extrovert, so it's like, it's easier for me to do this kind of thing in a group, the energy. I don't have the energy to sit in front of the camera just by myself, and this is what, I need some energy. So, and thank you all for bringing the energy for me. That's enough. Go ahead. Yes.
Probably more comment related to language that you were talking about. I saw this video. on
Okay,
Facebook today.
all right.
This sister was talking about the word morning.
More